She said "I do" to a stranger to get free of the man who raised her, and the cowboy who married her never once tried to own her. In the spring of 1883, Adeline Whitlock had exactly two roads in front of her. Stay in her father's house and marry a man she'd never chosen, so that her father could collect something he had no right to. Or walk out the gate before dawn with a single folded paper she didn't yet understand and trust her life to strangers in the foothills. She chose the gate. And the brand she'd been running from, the one stamped on every door of her father's holdings, would turn out to be worth far less than the name a quiet horseman would give her, freely, asking nothing. Stay with me to the end of this one, and leave a comment with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far Adeline's road has traveled. The lock on her bedroom door had been turned from the outside for 3 days. Augustus Whitlock did not raise his voice when he turned it. That was the thing Adeline had never been able to make outsiders understand. Her father did not shout, did not drink, did not throw things. He simply decided, and the world rearranged itself around the decision, and anyone who failed to rearrange was a problem he handled with the same flat patience he used on a balky horse. On the third morning she heard him on the stairs early, before the cook, before the hands, and she knew that if she meant to go it had to be now, while the only thing awake in the house was his certainty. She had stopped sleeping in her nightclothes 2 nights before. She pulled the window up an inch at a time so the old frame wouldn't sing, took her mother's satchel from under the loose board, and went out onto the porch roof in stocking feet with her boots tied around her neck. Inside the satchel was almost nothing. A change of clothes, her mother's Bible, the spine soft as cloth, $11, and a single sheet of heavy paper folded into quarters that she had found behind the Bible's end paper the day her mother died and had kept without ever quite reading, because the words on it were the dry kind that lawyers used, and because some part of her had understood that her father would want it, and that wanting was reason enough to keep it from him. She took the lame gelding from the far stall, the one her father wouldn't miss because he'd already written it off, and led it down the lane by hand until the house was a shape, and then a smudge, and then nothing behind the cottonwoods. Only then did she climb up and ride. By midday the gelding was favoring its off hind so badly she got down and walked beside it, and somewhere on a stretch of rock she turned her own ankle and kept walking on it anyway, because behind her, she was certain, men were already reading the note her father would have written by now in his even hand, the note that explained to every neighbor and every lawman in the county that poor Adeline's mind had gone soft with grief, and she was not to be believed. Caleb hardly heard the dog before he saw the woman. He was in the corral with a 3-year-old colt that had decided the morning was personally insulting, and he had the lead rope, and the colt had everything else, and he was not in a frame of mind to receive company. Then the old hound by the well stood up and pointed his nose at the road and made the low sound he only made for strangers, and Caleb looked up and saw her come around the bend of the trail, limping, leading a horse that was past leading anywhere, and he knew before she got close that whatever was wrong was the serious kind. He let the colt win for the day, looped the rope on the post, and crossed the yard wiping his hands on his thighs, slow, palms loose, the way you walked up on anything that had been frightened. She had a hand at her waist where a coat pocket might hide a small gun, and her chin was up too high, and her eyes went to the buildings, and the men and the exits before they ever landed on his face. He'd seen that look on green horses and on a few people. It meant, I am deciding right now whether I have to run again. Water's at the well, he said when he was still 10 feet off and he stopped there and didn't come closer. There's shade on the north side of the house and food when you want it. Nobody here'll touch you. He let that sit. Your horse needs to be put up before he founders. You let me have him, I'll see to him. That's all I'm asking. For a long moment she didn't move. Then the high chin came down a fraction, and she handed him the lead rope, and the second her fingers let go of it her whole body seemed to remember how tired it was. Hetty was already out the kitchen door with a tin cup. Hetty ran the station and had run it through 2 dead husbands and 1 flood, and she took one look and started giving orders that nobody argued with. The one-armed old man they called Bert fetched a bucket. The boy Tom, who'd come to them the winter before with no people and never said where from, hung back by the corral the way he did with everything new. And the goat, the wretched goat that the boy had raised on a bottle and named Biscuit, picked that exact moment to amble up behind the woman, take the trailing ribbon of her bonnet between its yellow teeth, and eat a third of it before anyone could stop it. The woman turned, startled, and for 1 second the fear cracked and something else showed through, something that might once have been a girl who laughed, and Tom went scarlet and grabbed the goat around the neck and said, "He does that. He eats everything. I'm awful sorry, ma'am." And the woman looked down at the half-chewed bonnet in the goat's mouth and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to stay level, "It's all right. It wasn't a very good bonnet anyway." And Hetty laughed, and the yard relaxed by a degree, and that was the first hour of it. Her name was Adeline, she told them at supper, and she would work for whatever they could spare and a corner to sleep in, and she would not take charity. She said that twice. Caleb watched her the way he watched a horse he hadn't decided about yet. She was soft-handed and town-raised. You could see it, but she ate like someone who didn't know when the next meal came, and when Hetty set her to wiping down the long table she did it without being asked twice and did it right into the corners. The next morning before light she was at the relay corral, and when Caleb came out she had already figured out which horses were the fresh teams and which were spent, and she was talking low to a mare that didn't take to strangers, and the mare was listening. "You've been around horses," he said. "My mother kept them," Adeline answered, not turning around. "Before. She said a horse will tell you the truth about a person faster than the person will." She rubbed the mare's jaw. She was usually right. Caleb didn't say anything to that. He just noted it, the way he noted everything, and went to fetch the harness. It was the third day, a Thursday, when the eastbound coach brought the news. The driver was a man Caleb had known for years, and he climbed down stiff and pulled Caleb aside by the harness shed and lowered his voice. "There's a man named Whitlock paying out word along the whole line," he said. "Says his daughter's gone missing, says she's not in her right mind, grief over her mother, says she might tell folks all manner of things and none of it to be trusted, offering money to anyone who sends word where she lands." He scratched his jaw. "Sounds to me less like a worried father and more like a man hunting strayed property. But there's a lot of stations between here and there, Caleb, and money talks at most of them." Caleb thanked him and watched the coach pull out, and then he stood in the yard a while looking at nothing, because he understood the shape of it now. A single woman, no husband, no money of her own, against a father with standing, and a paper saying her mind was soft. There wasn't a sheriff in the territory who'd take her word over his. The law, the way it was built, had no door in it for her to walk through. Except one. He found her in the evening doing the thing she did, mending by the last light, and Biscuit asleep with its ridiculous head in Tom's lap by the fire, and he crouched down across from her and said it plainly, because plainly was the only way he knew. "Your father's put word out you've lost your reason," he said, and watched her hands go still. "He's offering money for word of you. A grown woman alone has got no standing against a thing like that. He can have you fetched back as his to look after, and there's not a thing you nor I could do, and he knows it." She didn't cry. She set the mending down in her lap very carefully, and Caleb saw her do the arithmetic he'd already done, saw her reach the same dead end. "There's one thing the law respects more than a father," he said. "A husband. I'm not offering you anything but that, a name on a paper. It puts a wall between you and him that he can't climb. You'd keep your own room, your own self. It's a lock you can pick from the inside any time you want it gone." He stood up. "Think on it. I'll not bring it up again unless you do." She thought on it through the night, and in the morning she came to where he was forking hay and said, "All right, just that." And 4 days later, the circuit minister came through on his regular round, and married Caleb Hartley to Adeline Whitlock in the station yard with Hetty and Bert, and the coach driver and the boy as witnesses. And it took less than 10 minutes. And when it was done, the minister laid the certificate on the harness barrel to dry the ink and turned to shake Caleb's hand. And Biscuit, who had been waiting all morning for exactly this kind of opportunity, lunged in and bit off the lower corner of the document before Tom could tackle him. There was a frozen second. Then Adeline, who had not smiled in a week, put her hand over her mouth, and her shoulders started to shake, and the laugh came out of her in a rush that turned half into a sob and back into a laugh, and Hetty was pounding the boy on the back and crowing, and even Bert cracked his weathered face, and the minister gravely noted that the marriage was no less binding for the goat's opinion of it. They had a supper that night that was almost a wedding supper, beans and good bread and a pie Hetty produced from somewhere. And at one point, Adeline reached for the salt at the same moment Caleb did, and their hands touched and they both pulled back too fast, and Hetty saw it and said nothing, which for Hetty was a great deal of restraint. "You don't have to keep calling me Mrs. Hartley," Adeline said to Tom later when the boy kept stumbling over it. "Adeline's fine." "Hetty says it ain't proper," Tom said. "Hetty says proper, but Hetty also lets a goat sleep in the kitchen," Adeline said, "so I wouldn't take her too seriously." It got a laugh, and the laugh felt good, and Caleb, banking the fire across the yard, heard it and found he was glad of it in a way he didn't examine too closely. They had agreed on the floor and the cot, him on the floor, and he kept to it, and lay awake the first night listening to her breathe, and reminding himself that this was a lock she could pick from the inside, and that he had no business hopping the lock would rust shut. It wasn't her father who came first. It was the other one. A buggy, not a saddle horse, came up the trail on a clear afternoon 10 days into the marriage, and a man got down from it who did not belong on that road at all, in a good gray coat and a good gray hat, brushing dust off himself with 2 fingers like the dust had insulted him. He introduced himself as Theodore Granville, and he asked for Caleb by name, and he was so calm and so pleasant that it took Caleb a full minute to feel the cold come off him. They sat at the long table. Granville declined coffee. "I'll be direct, Mr. Hartley, as I'm sure you prefer," he said. "You've contracted a hasty marriage to a young woman who was, until very recently, promised to me. I bear you no ill will. These things happen. I am prepared to be generous." He laid a fold of banknotes on the table and squared the edges. "I should think a man in your position could do a great deal with that. In exchange, I would ask only that the marriage be quietly set aside. An annulment is a simple matter when a union is, shall we say, in name only. Everyone walks away the better for it." "No," Caleb said. Granville's smile didn't change, but something behind it did, a flicker of a man unused to the word. "You misunderstand the situation," he said. "Augustus Whitlock is not a man who loses. He will have what is his. I am offering you the comfortable road. The other road costs you this station, I should think, and possibly your liberty." He gathered the notes back up, unhurried. "Consider the land alone. You cannot mean to throw away a claim to property like the Aliner parcel over a matter of pride." And there it was. He said it the way a man says a thing he said 100 times in his own head, the name of a piece of ground, the Aliner parcel, and then his mouth tightened a fraction because he heard himself say it and knew he shouldn't have. Caleb didn't move a muscle. But Adeline, who had been at the dry sink with her back to them, the whole time washing the same cup, went very still, and Caleb saw her knuckles whiten on the rim, and he understood that whatever the folded paper in her satchel was, it had a name, and the name was her dead mother's, and these 2 men had been circling it like wolves around a downed thing. Granville left. The buggy went back down the trail. And Adeline dried her hands and said to no one, in a voice Caleb had not heard from her before, level and hard as a frozen pond, "I think I have been very stupid for a very long time." She didn't say about what. Not yet. The weeks after that should have been the bad weeks, the waiting weeks, and in a way they were, but they were also the weeks Caleb would think about later as the ones where it all changed without either of them deciding to let it. There is a rhythm to a relay station, the coaches east and west, the swapping of teams, the long flat middles of the day, and Adeline fell into it the way water finds its level. She made coffee that ruined every other coffee Caleb had ever drunk and would ever drink. She learned the horses by name and by temper. She taught Tom his letters in the evenings off the soft pages of her mother's Bible, the boy sounding out words with the goat draped over his feet. And one night Caleb came in to find the goat had eaten the bottom half of the page they'd been working from, and Tom was howling and Adeline was saying, with enormous seriousness, Well, Tom, the Lord giveth and Biscuit taketh away. And Caleb had to go back outside so they wouldn't see him laugh. The lock on the cot and the floor stayed picked open. Then one night a spring rain came down hard and they were both caught on the narrow porch under the eaves getting the harness in out of the wet, soaked through and laughing about it. And Adeline turned to say something and didn't say it, and the rain was loud. And Caleb did the most frightening thing he had ever done, which was nothing at all, which was just stand there and let her decide. And she stepped in and kissed him, and the lock, after that, was not a lock anymore. Neither of them said the word marriage out loud for a while, but the floor went unused. What she'd been doing in those weeks, besides falling in love with a horseman she'd married out of fear, was writing letters, careful ones in a clear hand, to a man named Faulkner who was the recorder of deeds for the county where her mother's people had settled. She did not tell Caleb what she'd written. She read and reread the folded paper from the satchel until the creases were soft, and one afternoon she rode the good mare to the nearest town and sent a wire and came back without saying where she'd been. And Caleb, who had learned that pushing her was the surest way to lose her, didn't ask. He only watched her come up the trail in the dusk and felt the thing in his chest he'd stopped pretending wasn't there. "Whatever it is you're carrying," he said that night, "you don't have to carry it alone." "I know," she said. "I'm getting used to that. It's harder than it sounds." She put her head on his shoulder. "Soon," she said. "Let me be sure first. If I'm right, I don't want to win it with a lie. I want to win it so it stays one." Augustus Whitlock came on a Tuesday, and he came in force. Not a buggy this time. 3 riders and a 4th man in a black coat who turned out to be a doctor, and behind them a county deputy with a paper in his saddlebag that made Caleb's stomach drop when he heard it read aloud. A writ, signed by a judge 2 counties over who happened to do a great deal of business with Augustus Whitlock. It declared Adeline Whitlock to be of unsound mind, a danger to herself, and remanded her to the care and guardianship of her father pending examination. The doctor in the black coat had already signed a statement to that effect, having never in his life laid eyes on her. And Granville's lawyer, the deputy added, had filed alongside it a claim that the marriage to Caleb Hartley was a fraud, contracted to evade the writ, never consummated, void on its face, and that any party found to be sheltering the woman against the order would answer for it. Augustus Whitlock sat his horse in the middle of the yard, calm as a church, and looked at his daughter the way Caleb had seen him look at nothing, because that was the worst of it. There was no rage in the man at all, only a vast and patient certainty that the world was about to rearrange itself the way it always did. "Adeline," he said, "get your things. We've troubled these people enough." Caleb stepped between them and said no, and the deputy said the writ was the writ. And for one terrible stretch of minutes, it looked exactly like what it was, which was power with paper on its side against people with neither. The doctor opened his bag. Bert had a hand near the rifle by the door, and Hetty had a hand on Bert's arm telling him not to be a fool, that you couldn't shoot your way out of a court order, that this was the kind of fight where guns only made you the villain. And Caleb knew she was right and hated that she was right. Then Adeline stepped forward past Caleb, past the deputy, out into the open of the yard, and she was not high-chinned and frightened the way she'd come up that trail weeks before. She was calm. She was, Caleb realized with a strange lurch, calm the same way her father was calm, except hers had something under it that his didn't. "You don't want me, father," she said. "You want the Aliner parcel. You've wanted it since the day she died. And the only way you could get it was to marry me to a man who'd hand it to you, or to have me declared mad so you could take it as my guardian. I've finally understood that. It only took me 2 years and a goat eating my bonnet to clear my head." She turned to the deputy and her voice didn't shake. "Sir, I'll go with you, but not to my father's house. To the county seat, to the recorder's office, before a witness today. And if I cannot stand before Mr. Faulkner and read out my own mother's recorded will in plain words, then you may sign me into any madhouse my father pleases and I'll go quiet. Is that a bargain a reasonable man can accept?" The deputy looked at the writ and looked at her and looked at Augustus Whitlock's face, which for the first time in Caleb's witnessing of it had gone the smallest bit gray, and the deputy, who was not a bad man, only a tired one, said, "That's fair. We ride to the seat." The recorder's office at the county seat was a low brick building with a stove in the corner and a counter worn pale by 40 years of elbows. And by the time they arrived, a crowd had gathered the way crowds do, because the deputy's errand had been no secret, and a rich man hunting his daughter down with a doctor in tow was the most interesting thing to happen in that town all spring. Mr. Faulkner was a small, dry, exact man with ink on his fingers, and he had been expecting them because Adeline's letters had reached him, and he had done the thing she'd asked, which was to go back through the books. Augustus Whitlock made his account first, smooth and grieved: the worried father, the unwell girl, the kind doctor, the unfortunate fraud of a marriage. Granville's lawyer spoke about the void contract. It was very persuasive. It was the kind of persuasive that money sounds like. And then Adeline laid her mother's folded paper on the worn counter beside the recorder's heavy ledger, and Mr. Faulkner opened the ledger to a page he had already marked, and put the two side by side, and the room went quiet enough to hear the stove tick. "This is a true copy," Faulkner said in his dry, exact voice to the deputy and the crowd and the whole listening room, "of the last will and testament of Eleanor Whitlock, recorded in this office in this book by Eleanor Whitlock herself, 11 days before her death, witnessed and sealed, while she was by every account in full possession of her faculties." He tapped the ledger. "It is plain. The parcel of land known locally as the Eleanor Place passes, in its entirety, not to her husband Augustus, but directly and solely to her daughter Adeline, to be hers outright upon her majority, which she attained 4 months ago." He looked up over his spectacles, and there was the faintest dry pleasure in it. "Augustus Whitlock has no claim to that land. He never had. He could only reach it through his daughter as her husband or as her guardian, which I believe, gentlemen, explains a great deal." He closed the ledger. "There is nothing wrong with this young woman's mind. Her mother trusted her enough to leave her everything. The record agrees with the mother. It came apart fast after that. The way a thing held together only by everyone agreeing not to look at it comes apart. The deputy folded the writ and put it away, and would not be the man who carried out a fraud in front of 40 witnesses and a recorder's ledger. Granville's lawyer remembered an appointment. Granville himself, when Caleb looked, was already gone, his interest in a penniless madwoman having evaporated the instant she became a landowner with the county recorder on her side, which told you everything about the kind of man he was. And Augustus Whitlock stood in the middle of the small brick room with the gray spreading all the way through his certainty now, and he looked at his daughter, and for one moment the patient flatness cracked and Caleb saw underneath not love. He was fairly sure it had never been love, but the bare astonishment of a man who had genuinely never once imagined that the world might decline to rearrange itself for him. "You'd shame me," he said, low, "in front of all these people, over dirt." "No, father," Adeline said. "I just stop you from taking what isn't yours. The dirt was never the shame, you are." And she turned her back on him, which Caleb understood was the only weapon she had ever truly needed, and the only one her father could not answer. And she walked out into the spring sunshine a free woman with land in her name and a husband at her side. And she had won it without firing a shot, without telling a single lie, with nothing but a dead woman's careful paper and the patience to read it. The land was hers, free and clear, and the thing Caleb made himself say, the night they got back to Cottonwood Crossing, the hardest and most honest thing was that she was free now in every direction. "You don't need the wall any more," he said. They were on the porch under the eaves where the rain had caught them weeks before. "No father to keep off, no writ. You've got your own ground and your own name and money enough to do as you please. The marriage was a lock you could pick from the inside. I want you to know the lock's open. You don't owe me a thing, not the land, not the staying. If you want to go build your own place on your own dirt, I'll hitch the team myself and not say a word against it." He had practiced not letting his voice do anything. It mostly worked. Adeline was quiet a while, looking out at the dark shapes of the corral and the well and the slope where the colt he'd given up on that first morning was grazing, gentled now. My whole life, she said, I was a thing that belonged to someone. A daughter that belonged to my father, a bride that was going to belong to Granville, a parcel of land that everyone wanted to belong to them through me. You're the first person who ever looked at me and asked. She turned to him. He took. Granville bought. You asked. That's the whole difference between them and you, Caleb, and it's the only difference that ever mattered. She put her hand flat on his chest. I'm not staying because of a wall or a writ or because I owe you. I'm staying because for the first time in my life it's mine to decide, and I've decided. The land comes here. We build on the slope where you can see the morning. If you'll still have me, now that I'm not in any trouble worth saving from. Adeline, he said, and couldn't manage the rest of it and didn't have to. They built the house that summer on the rise above the station, and half the county had a hand in it, because a relay station is a place everyone passes through, and everyone had been passing through Cottonwood Crossing long enough to feel they had a stake in it. Hetty ran the station better than ever and pretended to be put out about the wedding she now had to plan a proper version of. Bert taught Tom to drive a 4-horse team. The boy stayed. There'd never really been a question of the boy not staying, and somewhere in the building of the house it became plain to everyone, including Tom, that he was theirs and they were his, and nobody made a ceremony of it. It was just true. The Aliner parcel they didn't sell and didn't move to. They leased the grazing and let the income do its quiet work, and Adeline said her mother would have liked that. The land staying land, working, paying its own way, owned outright by a woman who'd read the fine print. Augustus Whitlock's reach, which had seemed to cover the whole world from inside that locked room, turned out to end at the county line. Without the land he'd schemed for, he was only a proud man with thinning standing, and the story of how he tried to have his sane daughter committed to steal her mother's bequest did not, it turned out, improve that standing. He did not come again. Adeline did not write to him, and did not, she told Caleb honestly, miss the writing. The goat lived a long and infamous life and ate, over the years, 2 more hats, 1 ledger, a corner of the new house's window curtains, and a county survey map that nobody much missed. And when at last Biscuit died of pure old age in the sun by the well, Tom, who was by then a young man taller than Caleb, cried like the boy he'd been, and they buried the wretched animal under the cottonwoods, and Adeline said the only fitting thing, which was that there was a creature who had never once asked anyone's permission for anything and had lived gloriously regardless, and they should all be so lucky. Years went by the way they do. There were children in time, who grew up on a place where the doors had no locks that turned from the outside, who grew up knowing that their mother had once walked out of a house at dawn on a turned ankle with $11 and a folded paper, and had chosen everything after that for herself. On a warm evening late in their lives, Adeline sat on the porch of the house on the rise with her husband's hand in hers, watching the light go gold on the slope, and she asked him the question she'd never quite asked in all those years. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken Granville's money, set it all aside the way he wanted? Caleb thought about it the way he thought about everything, slow and honest. I think about your father sometimes, he said finally. How he never once asked you for anything, just decided and reached out his hand to take. Granville the same, only with a checkbook instead of a writ. Whole pack of men your whole life reaching out to take. He turned her hand over in his, the soft-handed town girl's hand gone strong and brown and capable over 40 years. I never wanted to be one more hand reaching to take something off you. I just wanted to ask, and to keep on asking every day whether you'd stay. And every day you've answered, and that's been the whole of my luck. Adeline leaned her head on his shoulder the way she had under the eaves in the rain a lifetime before. I said I do to get free of a man who owned me, she said. And the joke of it, the thing nobody warned me, is that the words that were supposed to be just a lock on a door turned out to be the truest thing I ever said. She closed her eyes in the gold light. He raised me to be a thing. You married me to be a person. That's the only difference between the man I ran from and the man I ran to. He took. You asked. And being asked, Caleb, after a whole life of being taken from, was the brand new life. It wasn't the land or the house or any of it. It was just that in the end. Somebody asked. She had said "I do" to escape her father's control. The cowboy gave her a brand new life. But the truth they never told anyone, the truth that sat between them quiet on the porch as the stars came up over the slope, was simpler and harder than any of it. He never gave her the new life at all. He only ever did the one thing none of the others had thought to do. He asked. And she, free at last to answer, said yes, and went on saying it every ordinary day for the rest of a life that was, finally and entirely, her own to give.